So very good. We'll start this next segment as a continuation about the timely topic of employee engagement. And it's funny, these are things that you know on some level, but you've never really put them into the words of employee engagement. And so the last couple of years, I'm starting to hear that term more and more. And the idea is, boy, if they're engaged, they're going to add more to the company, and the company's going to benefit. But there's not a lot of direction on how do you actually do that. And so let's talk a little bit about your experience and what you've learned about how to create a culture of engagement.
Well, I think that is a really good question because when you talk about concepts, that's the reason they're called concepts. But then how do you make them real and concrete and implement them? And that's probably where the challenge comes in for company. There are many, many models. One that I like to create a culture of engagement is really to look at the components of what employees want from a company. Usually they certainly want training, especially when we start talking about the different generations. They want to be developed. And you can develop people in lots of ways, and it's beneficial to the company. Unfortunately, over the last probably couple of decades, companies want employees to come to them trained. And so that's become more of a challenge because I consistently hear from employees, they kind of threw me out there and then I just had to kind of, sink or swim. And so they don't feel as prepared as they could to really engage with your customers, which I think might be a danger sign for. And I'm sure you've had that experience where you're talking to employees.
Sure, my mind is racing. I've experienced this firsthand on many levels. So I have worked at 3 Fortune 100 companies, and I've had the misfortune of getting into them at times where they were cutting back. And so things like employee development budgets and acquiring new skills, those just go out the window. They see that as a hard cost, and it gets eliminated. And yet on the HR releases that come out, employees are our number one asset, and we're treated often more like a liability.
Well, one of the examples that I experience all the time that from a training perspective is if you go to any fast food restaurant, go to the drive-thru, order anything. I don't care what kind of food it is. Order anything. And once you get home and unpack whatever you bought, they've got 35 napkins, 15 packets of sauce.
Right.
And you didn't ask for any of that.
Sure.
Right? Somebody is paying for that. The company is paying for it. And literally, from a training perspective, I keep thinking, if they had just asked me, do you need napkins? Do you even use hot sauce? Which I don't.
Sure.
But I've thrown away plenty of it, right? Because I don't need it. And so it's a training failure to me that somewhere that message is not getting from the people that are paying for these resources, these ingredients, and they're just wasting money because they're not pleasing the customer because they didn't even ask me and give me an opportunity to say, well, save that for the customer that really wants it, but it's a waste to me.
Sure.
And
so they left you at, do you want fries with that?
Exactly.
But not, do you want 30 napkins and 3 extra sauce?
And I mean, it's so wasteful because, really mounds of napkins and ketchup and things that I don't eat ketchup on my fries. Maybe I'm odd, but I don't. But I always get it because they never ask me. So that's just a really basic example of where training somehow is not, and it costs them money. I bet they could cut their budget for those items in half without even thinking about it if they just really changed the way they trained them and had a way to make sure that it took. And so that's the real cost of employee engagement. So training is a basic thing. One of the other things I hear from employees, and that's at all levels, so this is not just entry-level employees.
Sure.
This is even in the executive ranks where in some companies, they have a culture of centralized decision-making. And even at the executive level, sometimes they're not as involved in the decision-making as they'd like to be. No one's asking them, so what is the cost to the company? There's less innovation, because if someone that's so far removed from your customers in your geography, because some of that is regional.
Sure.
All of that's not, all customers in the South are not like all customers, in other parts of the country. And so the centralized decision making where the people closest to the customer don't get invited to kind of make those decisions or at least have major input into them is also a way that you see employees become less engaged. I've heard executives say, well, I'm not going to work any harder, and they didn't ask me for my opinion, and when
Right.
I offered it, they disregarded it.
Sure.
It's starting to be more prevalent in the younger generations where that is one of the reasons that makes them start looking for another job.
Sure. They want more interaction. They want more of a
Exactly.
voice,
Exactly.
more meaning in what
Sure.
they're doing.
Meaning is a key word. So you said that, and I will tell you that I often talk to employees about the difference between their lives and their lifestyles because their jobs support their lifestyle.
Right.
More and more, the generations want the two things to be interrelated. They want their work to be worthwhile and to know that it counted for something. So it's a mixing of that life and lifestyle. And so that goes back to the conversation we had at the beginning about them being emotionally connected. They want to be able to be proud of what their company is contributing to society in some way.
Sure. So, and you and I have talked about this before. The newest generation in the workplace is the millennials.
Sure.
And do you want to expound a little bit more about some of the things you're hearing from them, maybe even some examples of how this plays out?
Sure. What I hear in general is that social responsibility is something they take very seriously, and they take it serious early in their careers. They want to work for companies that they think are making a contribution to both the marketplace and the community. And the sooner companies can involve them in that, the more opportunity they have to retain them. Most companies will tell you that where they're really having retention problems is with employees in that 0 to 3 years. Now, keep in mind, 0, that means they didn't make a year, right?
Gotcha.
And that is happening more often. So one story I can tell you about that from my careers when we were in the staffing business is that our managers would go to campus many times because we'd have college hire recruitment projects. And so one of the managers went to campus and they saw a young lady there that they really liked, but we didn't have any openings at the time. But they said to her, we'd love to stay in touch with you because we know we'll have openings shortly. And so we want to stay in touch because we really liked, what you have to offer and would like to have further conversation. She agreed.
Right.
So about 4 or 5 months later, we had openings. And so he contacted her again. And so she said, oh, let's just call him John. Oh, Mr. John, thank you so much for following up with me, but I just started training with the company where I've accepted the job. And so she said, and so I'm in training now, and I have a job, but I so appreciate you, staying in touch with me. So he said, oh, I'm really glad to hear that you found something. Sorry that, you didn't give
Right.
us an opportunity. So this happened in about November when he was October, November, having that conversation with her. But before they ended, she said, check back with me in January. By then, I'll know if I'm going to stay here or not. So this was October, November.
Right.
So she was giving, and I think it's very representative of the conversations that I have with members of the younger generation. They don't, like my generation, the baby boomers, they don't wait over 30 years to say, I'm going to see how this goes.
Right.
It's more like 3 months or so, 3 to 6 months, they say, is this really going to work out for me? And what is the measuring stick? Am I going to grow? Are they going to pour into me and develop me, give me an opportunity to grow and make a bigger contribution? And if that's not true, they've been raised by, the schools that they attended, what they've seen happen to their parents and the friends of their parents that say, the employee company contract is different.
Right.
And so whatever I'm going to have, I have to do it based on my skills and abilities and not being part of a company for the rest of my life.
Sure.
So they go into the workplace with the expectation that I'm going to work multiple places in my career.
Right.
This is just my current stop. And when it stops being good for me, I'll move to the next one. So that's a huge thing that companies should pay attention to. Now, I have seen some companies that have done some things, like, for instance, they used to recognize tenure in many companies at 15 to 20 years with the company.
Right.
Many companies now have shortened that to that you get something at 5 years.
Right.
and then maybe again at 10 years, but they've dialed back, when you start getting that recognition because they have many young people that they know will not be there
Right.
for
right.
15, 20 years if they don't start showing them some kind of acknowledgement and recognition. So that's when we talk about models around employee engagement. That's one that I think we need to consider, is that social responsibility early, the development and training early,
Right.
shared decision-making, just input. It doesn't mean they have to make the final decision, but at least hear my ideas and let me know that you seriously considered them.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that brings up an interesting way of looking at it, for me at least. Is it sounds like employee engagement really means different things to different generations.
Sure.
So if you're at a large company and you have multiple generations, then the engagement or the way you engage someone who's a millennial versus Generation X versus baby boomers may in fact be different.
It could be, and that's really not any different than you differentiate with your customers, right?
Sure.
And so those are the two important groups, your customers and your employees, and they both require a bit of customization. What I am seeing, though, is that even for the more mature generations, they're starting to pay attention to what the younger generations are asking for and getting. So if they're still in the workplace,
Right.
they have become a little more open to asking for what they want, because they've seen that it's working for the younger generations. And guess what? They have more experience about how to ask and how to be more engaging when they're asking based on their results, and they've got the track record. So that is that's why I say that it's good for the generations to be in the workplace, because they're learning from each other.
Sure. Yeah, and just to go back to one thing, because this is something I'm more passionate about, which is employee development.
Yeah.
I think one of the items that's critical to ask, it gets seen as a hard cost. You're the manager and you own the P&L, and they say, well, if you want to invest in that, you already have a small budget,
Sure.
you can take it out of that. And part of the conversation that seems to be missed is the cost of not doing that training, or the cost of continuing the way that things are. And so not just seeing it as that hard cost, but a soft cost that can actually add value back in to offset. When I think in terms of accounting, right, you have the liability and you have the asset, and it gets clumped in this liability sometimes without really having the asset column, ticked off.
Well, let me share with you something that a friend shared with me when we were having a similar conversation. It changed the way I saw employee development. Most employee development is about soft skills. And I used to wish we had something else to call it other than soft skills, because that didn't quite have the impact of, dollars and cents and
Right.
the way they think about, value. And so when we were having this conversation, she said, well, Bev, I kind of like the word soft skills. She said, but if you think about it, think about all the hiring that you've done in your company. And when you post a job and you list the skills, she said probably they're only maybe the first 5 skills that might be functional hard skills.
Right.
Everything else that you're looking for in that candidate is in the soft skills category. And if you look at where companies have missteps, say you take someone that's really good at their job, say they're great at sales, they're wonderful salespeople, and they do really well, have a great, strong track record as a salesperson. So then they say, well, we bet they'd be a great sales manager.
Yeah.
And so they promote that person. Well, they already know how to sell, so they go in and they want to do exactly what they did as a salesperson, and they want everybody on their team to do that.
Right.
But the skills they don't have is how do you give people the goal and let them, based on their own strengths, figure out how to get to the goal. That is
Sure.
soft skills. And that's where most management fails. And a little later, we're going to talk about how important it is. What are the key drivers for employee engagement? The number one key driver is their relationship with their direct manager. And that one by itself is a huge, it's one of those pass-fail
Right.
kinds of tests for
Right.
employees. And so when you hear employees, many times, I am in so many conversations at every level where they say, you know what, I really like the company, I believed in it, but the person I report to, it just didn't work for me, so I left.
Sure.
So I think, when you look at what actually happens in the workplace, the soft skills training is what makes the difference, because most people get promoted based on their functional skills,
Yeah, exactly.
but they fail because their lack of soft skills, and that is clearly an employee development issue.
Yep, very good. What else would you like to cover in this session?
Well, I think that, I just want to wrap it up by talking about, again, having a culture of engagement and really looking at what that means for you and your company, because it's different from company to company. And the one thing I would suggest to companies is that they make their employees a partner in the development of that process. Ask for their input, because they really want to tell you, but you have to make sure that they feel like you really want to know.
Yeah, and that you're willing to do something with the results.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, very good.